Here we are again, David.
Okay, good.
Got to stop
Excellent.
meeting like this.
Exactly.
So we have a topic for this episode, which is staying sane in lockdown.
Yeah.
And we just sort of chatted about the reality of catching up on that now because, there is a horizon. But maybe it's also good to understand what it's shown us, what it's showing us, and what it might be giving us insights into. So that
Yeah.
the staying sane, the how did you stay sane, and what does it mean moving forward? So a lot to talk about, but we'll have 30 minutes on the topic and see where it takes us.
So Guy, let me break with tradition and ask you the first question. How have you experienced lockdown? What's been your experience of being cooped up at home?
Well, I've experienced it in two ways, and because of the nature of the role, which is this constant conversation with people in other organizations, I've been living it through other people's experiences, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
And when you've got groups of 10 or whatever it is on a Zoom, your exposure to this is great. And then there's my personal experience. So from I saw a Facebook meme that said, for those of you struggling with lockdown, talk to an introvert, they're having a great time. Which and so for me, I've kind of loved it. There is an element of I would like more freedoms and etc. But actually the capacity for me just to hunker down, tinker, do stuff in my little sort of mad scientist kind of way with more time, taking away travel and staying away at night. So it's worked for me very, very positively. So I'm on a personal note, my sanity, I'm almost a little bit fearful of going back to travel and the being away. And it's probably shifted. Do I want to be away 2 or 3 nights a week?
But on balance, your motivation and morale has gone up, has it?
It has, yes, and which is interesting because, and we'll get into this, but observing and having conversations with people, very often dependent on their personal characteristics or their social situation.
Yes.
That's been very interesting. Those that have a greater need to be out and engage, and those that are not living in a 5-bed detached property with their own office, but they're just in a 1-bedroom apartment and slowly losing their marbles. So I think there's context and there's characteristic, and that's quite interesting. But for me personally, actually, I have to say, rather buoyant, to be frank.
Yes, it's interesting. I mean, I make no pretense of this being a scientific study, but I was running a webinar just a few days ago, and I asked people, on balance, has your motivation improved a little, a lot, or gone down a little or a lot? The finding was, and we had about, 55 people on the webinar. On balance, it was 3 to 1 that motivation and morale had gone down. It had gone up for a small number of people, and it hadn't gone up a lot for any of them. It had gone up a bit for a small group, but 3 times as many it had gone down a bit or down a lot, and there was a bunch in the middle it hadn't changed at all. And I think that as I think about the groups I've met in this kind of medium before, I think that's probably more typical than your experience, although that you'd have been one of those that group that for whom the motivation and morale have gone up. I too have actually had a pretty good time in this, but I'm conscious that I've not had to homeschool my kids. I've got lots of space. I can spend time doing what I want to do increasingly. And I do believe that quality of life, and therefore probably motivation and morale, is something to do with the relevant choices you can make. So the more salient choices you can make, the more you think that your life is pretty good, and so on, and your quality of life increases. So if those choices are taken away, I think that people struggle. The other thing that I find, again, being from a psychological point of view, is that people have a sense of well-being if they can predict and control their experiences. predict and control. But
Yeah.
during the lockdown, we've been able to do neither. We've not been able to predict. In fact, right at the very start, no one predicted the pandemic. But even on the shorter term, we've not been able to predict whether the numbers in our area are going to go up and down. We've not been able to control it except our own experiences and so on. And so in the absence of prediction and control, people feel vulnerable. And vulnerable is not a comfortable place for most people to be.
Yes, and I think that sanity element is, I could imagine that for some people that initial, oh my gosh, I'm at home, wow, this is potentially awesome. For some maybe straight away not, but for it's almost that uniqueness of the situation. Then I think there's this, for some, there's been a blurring of, I knew where work started and stopped, and I knew where I started and stopped. And I know we all talk about being a whole person in life, but for others, yes, but I am, but it still was nice to know that at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, there was that line. So I think for some, there's not been, well, we haven't worked through, and maybe we don't have to, but that, how do I now deal with this reality?
Yeah.
So the freedom was great. I can put the washing on and then hop on a call.
Yeah.
And I could work a little bit later tonight to catch up if I nip out and do something. Hurrah, lovely. But then where's my identity? Am I just working 7 days a week now? Because it used to be pretty well 9 till 5. So there's almost a kind of learning journey that we haven't quite gone through yet, which is that if this stays, and for some, certain organizations, look, we've got 50,000 employees working from home. Whatever we do, there's going to be this option. And some will say, look, we'll keep the offices open, so if you want to, you can come in.
Yep.
Or will there be an enforced, well, actually, we're not going to have that cost, because flipping heck. So you are going to work from home now. And there will be this educational piece of, well, if I am, how do I manage my environment and blah, blah, blah. So we haven't quite gone through that yet, I think.
That's right. And I think what you describe is something, again, fairly common. And there's been some interesting studies about the importance of routine. It's as if we need a kind of a pulse, a daily pulse, a weekly pulse, maybe even a kind of quarterly pulse, an annual pulse. And in its absence, and of course work gave us that. So Monday to Friday were days that were really quite different. Occasionally we had blurred evenings because we had to take a bit of work home with us because there was too much to do in the day or whatever. Or maybe occasionally, people would start Monday on Sunday night and all this sort of stuff. But by and large, there was a block of time that belonged to my employer and a block of time that belonged to me. And moving between them kept me kind of sane and kept me kind of regular in the way I kind of approach each day, each week, each month, and so on. And so it turns out that routine is remarkably important. And so as I've been running webinars for people around these issues, I've been encouraging them to create for themselves a routine. It turns out that we sleep better if we go to bed at the same time every night and get up at the same time every morning, irrespective of what day of the week it is, because the daily pulse is needed for that. It helps if we have a number of opportunities to do exercise. It doesn't help to work right the way through without any breaks. It turns out that our cognitive capacities get weaker if we don't build breaks into our day. And one of the webinars that we ran, I had a Pilates teacher come and just talk to people about, here's a 10-minute exercise routine you could do every couple of hours just to keep you mobile and keep you from seizing up and so on. So regularity, boundaries between work and home, even if we're in the home all the time, and some opportunity to do some exercise every day, and maybe even a slug of it, a more ambitious slug of it for the good of our longer term health. All of these things turn out to be important. Add to it diet, and what have you ended up with? That Granny was right. All the things that your granny would have told you to do turn out to be right. And there's good evidence about that. And I find that really quite fascinating, that in a sense, knowing how to survive in lockdown is the sort of thing that I suspect previous generations would have known rather better than the generations that are used to everything being on tap and there being no boundaries at all.
Yeah, I really pick up on that. There's two things that I've really noticed as well, which is the children, love them, but if they're 14 and they can self-manage, you've had a very different experience probably than if you've got an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old who from time to time are losing their marbles and you're trying to work. So I think contextually, when schools go back, that'll bring a massive dynamic, because that routine thing sounds fantastic and I buy into that 100%, but there'll be some people that would go, yeah, and when would that be then? Because actually there is the control, back to your point, has been taken. And so that the having, and that children is a massive thing. And also I think I noticed this thing around privacy. And strangely enough, if I'm away from my partner at work, there's a privacy where I still have an element of myself that is separate as an identity from the one that we're constantly sharing. So if we're in an enforced constant cohabitation, as one person put it rather brilliantly, the quality of our relationship, Guy, was fundamental on the fact that we used to go to work and then come back at the end of the day, because we would have our own experiences, our identities were able to be separate. But when we're in the room together constantly, there's a loss of privacy. Not that I want things to be private, which is quite interesting, and I don't have the psychological reasoning behind that, but I notice that as an element of truth for some people.
Yes. So is that part of it some to do with, this is my territory, and I like the fact that this is my territory?
I think there might be an element for some people that is, I don't know if it's about that territory aspect. I have a sense it's more around that sense of my own experiences, my own reactions, my own emotions. If I have a bad call, I can rationalize it before I have to explain it. I may come home and say to you, blimey, tough day, but I dealt with it well. But if you've heard me being submissive, or maybe you've not seen my relationship with my boss, or whatever it is, and now you're more privy to my ups and downs, that privacy element, that capacity for me to make sense of it for myself, and then come back and offer you my day. I had a hard day today. But I think what I've learned from it is, but you've already seen it. You already know. So I've lost my moment of self because you're already there with me. And I think that's difficult for some people.
But that feels to me like a need to be able to present a kind of a mask of who I am, rather than be, who I am openly and honestly. It feels like it's a need, feel like the Greek persona, the mask that came on in front of the character to say this, I want you to think of me like this.
Well, this is very interesting because not all relationships are maybe where they should be, right? And it's not like there's 100% everybody gets married and stays together. Yeah, so this may be an indication of all of those statistics, but there's just something I think around for some people. Yeah, the capacity to have the open, transparent, intimate conversations with partners is fine, but for others, I think there's just a sense of, where am I? Because I don't have that, not isolation, but I don't have that time with myself. And if I was embarrassed on a call, or I came off it pumped, hey, it doesn't matter. But for some people, they've commented to me, and I've noticed it more with people that are in those close proximity situations, that they have a sense of just self. Where am I here? I'm on constant show. One gentleman, his desk was in his hallway because they had no other room. Yes. The whole family was going up and down the stairs, but there was from the moment he woke up to the moment he went to bed, apart from when he went to the loo, that was his only moment of self. Yes. Yes. And that was interesting.
I think I understand that, and I see that a number of the people that I work with, and to some extent my wife and I as well, we need to know that our life is our life, so that I've got a place that I can develop who I am, so that then I've got something more I can give to you.
Yes.
Whereas if my life is a subset of your life, then in a sense there's nothing that I can give to you, because we've all fashioned it together. So I can actually get a sense of that. It's different for me because my wife and I, we're both extroverts, but also we're both psychologists, and for 20 years we worked together. And it's funnily enough, in lockdown we're working less together because Jenny does her coaching and I do my professorial stuff at Henley. And in a sense, we've created more separation through lockdown than we had before. And so, but interestingly, either has worked for us. But we've had to kind of have this sense of boundary management, so that she needs me to know when she's working and can't be disturbed, and that's less of an issue for me, but it's important for her. So I have to know that when the study door is shut, it means you stay out as well, not just everybody else, but you, mate.
Well, so, we said staying sane in lockdown, and interestingly enough, I think from having now hundreds of conversations with people during this period, the one thing seems to be not a surprise to me at all, because it would be common sense at the best of times, but maybe it's accentuated, where that willingness to have the conversation with another human being.
Yes.
That very often, we look at any quality of relationship in the workplace. Very often I'm not working with you 24/7. So I always, when I do diagnostics and somebody says, yes, Fred and I, we found our balance, I go, okay, now that normally means we don't really get on, but what we've done is we found a way of transacting as we need to, and we give each other space. Now, some relationships are like that, right? We've been together a long time. We found our balance. I'm not hearing that that's maybe the highest quality of relationship you can have, because you're transacting when you need to, etc. But actually, what is a high quality relationship? It's that.
But we can start almost before that. The evidence suggests that relationships really are crucially important. In fact, I don't know if you saw, but there was a formal university-based study that hit the papers just a couple of days ago about why people get Zoom fatigue. Here we are. But two of the factors that were interesting that caught my eye in that was that, firstly, when you're interacting in this kind of medium, apparently people have to have more eye contact here because it's somehow the medium demands it, as it were. So if I start to sort of look around and
it's highlighted,
yeah, it becomes more obvious, and that's partly one of the reasons why people get more tired, because they can't take those mini breaks, literally just a few seconds at a time, of looking somewhere else, being just slightly distracted maybe, but kind of recharging their energies. But the other it's the fact that I can see me as well as see you. And that's exhausting for people, apparently, that they're constantly seduced to self-monitor too much. And as a result, the conversation doesn't feel as natural. Add to that the lack of an awful lot of physical cues of a non-verbal kind, and you've got some characteristics of this medium that actually people find more tiring than the face-to-face medium when you're physically with somebody.
And I agree, and I think that staying sane in lockdown sort of thing that we set ourselves is, of course, for some people, they have a partner who's at home looking after children, and now you're in my domain all day. So I'm also not used to having that kind of second authority figure in the household all day. So I think all of these sort of factors come in, but I think it does come down to that, what is the answer, Guy? I may get asked. And I think the answer is that, yes, you can self-regulate, you can reflect, you can say, okay, how may I do this differently? But actually having conversations with people that say in the home space, but also at work, we need gaps. And that's a very simple thing. Somebody said to me rather profoundly, said, yeah, I used to have meetings all day, but even when they were back to back and I was constantly late for meetings, the point was I was walking between rooms.
Yes.
I was going from one building to the other.
Yeah.
Et cetera, et cetera. So I
yeah.
had gaps.
Yeah, so it's hard to disentangle one meeting from the next because you're in exactly the same place, looking at exactly the same screen. I mean, you sort of like, what is the answer? Well, we have some choices. You know, we've chosen to work for our podcasts in a visual medium, but we could choose just to have a phone call, and that gives us the gap from the constant eye contact. The fact that I can see myself in here. Apparently there's a version of Zoom where you can turn your own camera, not just your own camera off so that the other person
yes, I can. Yeah,
but you can lose the little icon of But so maybe what's happening is that we're not exercising the choices that we could exercise if we chose to. We could say, you know, Guy, when we meet tomorrow, shall we just make it a normal phone call? Because then, you know, we can do a bit more thinking, we can kind of close our eyes, we can walk around the room, you know, we can, there's all sorts of choices we could make, which we're not doing. It's as if we're defaulting to this one medium, which is slightly oppressing people.
I think that's very interesting, that control. What controls do we have? And I had a call with a client the other day, and we said, look, for part of the morning, because there's no visual aids needed, have your phones on if you want. You know, you can do it as you will, but it's totally acceptable. Just that we have a call, headphones in or whatever, and you can just wander around and do stuff. And actually, we just thought, let's try it. Let's have an hour. And people were pottering. I said, can I just quick check in? What's everybody doing? And one guy went, I'm ironing the kids' clothes for tomorrow. But he was totally present.
Yeah.
He was just autopiloting there. But he was
remember the principle that if you can make a choice, it increases your quality of life a bit. You know, and I'm choosing to iron the kids' clothes because I don't need to think about ironing the kids' clothes. I do need to think about what you're saying to me, but this is perfectly therapeutic. The other thing is standing up rather than sitting down. You know, I can move around more. I don't need to get that pain in the back in my buttocks and in the back of my I just think of Forrest Gump when I think of that. The buttocks. And also in the small of your back. You know, you can be doing things to keep yourself more physically active if you exercise choice. But let me say, can I just set something out just for a couple of minutes? Because when I've done these seminars on staying sane in lockdown, one of the models I've wanted to share with people is a model that comes from neuroscience. It's called spaces. Have you heard about that?
No, I haven't. No.
Set it out for you just briefly.
Yeah, please.
Stop me if I get boring.
No, crack on.
But so it's SPACES. So it's described by a woman called Hilary Scarlett in a book called Neuroscience for Organizations. And it came out about just 3 years ago or so. But she says, look, if you want your brain to be healthy, there are a number of kind of preconditions that need to obtain in order for your brain to be able to work at its best. And they are self-esteem. So the S is self-esteem, purpose, autonomy, certainty, equity, and social connection, spaces. So when it comes to self-esteem, one of the things I try to get people to work with is to say, can you please rehearse the things you've succeeded at doing today, not the things that you haven't? Because you need to just remind yourself that you actually have been successful today. And what I've often got people to do, if they really struggled with this, is to put a little notepad next to their toothbrush. And I say, just before you brush your teeth at night, could you write down simply 5 things that you've achieved today? Because there will be at least 5, there'll be more. Just write the first 5 that come to mind. So that when you go to bed, you've got success in your mind, not failure. Don't worry about the things that you haven't. You'll get to those. There's another day tomorrow. You know, if you just wake up, that's all you need to do, and you'll find it. So self-esteem. Secondly, purpose. We all have a sense of purpose in our lives, If we don't, we often struggle. But most of us have a sense of purpose, but also our organizations have a sense of purpose as well. It's useful to remind yourself the purpose that you serve. So I love executive education at the business school, and I get this opportunity to work with really smart people who have got real issues that they're trying to get better at every day. That feels to me like a bit of a privilege. So I just like to remind myself that that's the purpose I'm trying to serve. Thirdly, autonomy. It's really helpful to give yourself as much scope to make decisions as possible. We were just talking about it, stand up rather than sit down, turn the camera off rather than turn it on, have a proper phone call, do things while you're doing something else if you want to, negotiate that with other people, but or simply just make the decision yourself and live with the consequences. And if you lead a team, work hard at giving them as much space as possible to make their own decisions. So autonomy really makes a big difference. Fourthly, certainty. Now, there's an awful lot of uncertainty around at the moment, but if we want to, we can stick to sources of information which are factually based. Are restaurants going to be open in June? Who knows? Is the vaccine going to? Is there going to be a variant of the virus which is going to be immune to the vaccine? Who knows? There's an awful lot of stuff like that, but there's an awful lot of facts as well. How many vaccinations have there been? What's the efficacy rate? You can look at factual websites, or you can listen to rumor and conjecture. If you do the latter, you'll go balmy. If you do the former, you can work with certainty. And there are other certainties that we have as well. We've talked about our purpose. That's pretty certain. And our values, those are pretty certain as well. So we can focus on the things which we can be more certain about. The E stands for equity, fairness. And there's an awful lot of unfairness around at the moment, but if it comes to decisions we take, particularly if we lead a team, we can make sure that we give our time to our team members according to their need, and we can reflect adequately the things that they've succeeded at as well. So that feels fair as well. And then finally, social connection. We can choose to keep our relationships strong, or we can abandon them. I suggest that we should choose to keep them strong, to keep some time in every day to spend time with other people. Even if we do a job which is fundamentally kind of staring at a computer screen or writing reports or whatever it may be, make time for people, because the social connection matters. So self-esteem, purpose, autonomy, certainty, equity, social connection. And Hilary Scarlett's work as a neuroscientist suggests that if we can keep those variables in our mind and strong, then our brains are going to do better. In other words, we will do better. It's a kind of a bit of a formula for getting those things right, in addition to the things we mentioned earlier about routine and exercise and diet and sleep and so on. So there's a physical reality that we need to look after, and a psychological reality that we can look after as well. And I think those two sets of ideas really will look after us in lockdown.
I like, there's something solid about a methodology that isn't sort of saying, isn't dictating, but it's saying, hey, listen, consider these factors. And when I'm hearing that, as when I'm doing that daily coaching, a model like that, I think is very useful. But I talk about meaning, give yourself meaning, give yourself something that has value for you, that is worth maintaining or developing. And there's a lot of that in there, because all of those things, that spaces model is going to give you meaning. It's going to give you that value. So I'm going to share with you, and what I love about us, the professor and the coach, is that sometimes I do have this little hesitation of me offering something like I'm about to, because after when you quote some of the things that you do, and I kind of go, yep, that's why he's the professor. I then come out with what I'm going to come out with, which is when I say, when you look at your week and you think about what you've got to do, right? There's another question, which is also, who have you got to be? So who have you got to be? Yes, for others, but also for yourself.
Yeah.
And then to make that stick in people's brains, I go, that song, or the jazz kind of funk of doobie doobie doo, and that doobie doobie doo. As you're going through the day, the week, you see, and this is where there's a fundamental disparity between the way that you're offering things and I am. You're talking about neuroscience white papers, and I'm talking about doobie doo. But I think there's something that actually says, do you know what, as you've got that model, which I think is brilliant, and I'd run with that straight away. It manifests in that, yeah, it's not so much just what I'm doing, it's who I'm being. And it's not just outward facing for others, because that's exhausting. Who do I need to be for?
Yeah.
So I do have self-esteem, I have got purpose, I do have autonomy, I do have certainty, equity, and I am not losing my connection with the world.
Yeah.
So I love that. What I love is when I can see something that you're offering connect straight away to something, you know, in a much more different way I'm talking about, but there's depth there to what you're saying, which I love.
Two very kind of feet on the ground statements then. One is, you know, when you get on an aircraft and they say, if these oxygen masks should drop, then make sure you put your own oxygen mask on first before you try and help somebody else.
Perfect.
Well, that's what I think about spaces. And when I do this, I say, well, let's just think about things you can do for you. And then let's think about how you can apply that to your team. But may I say, get yourself sorted out first. You know, so make sure you put your own oxygen mask on before you try and help somebody else. And the other thing is that that if we want to get it all down to one thing that we can do that really helps us a lot, I'd offer this. I'd say, I mean, psychologically, there's the physical stuff you've got to do. You know, you need to move around, you need to look after diet, sleep, all that. But psychologically, if I could offer people just one thing, it would simply be this: remind yourself regularly why what you do matters, and to whom, and to whom. Why what you do matters and to whom. And every job, if someone's prepared to pay you a stack of money to do a particular job, the chances are that it matters to somebody, that you do that job and that you do it well. And I think we should be unashamed and unafraid to remind ourselves why what we do matters and to whom. I love working with ideas. I like working with smart people who are easy to talk to. You and I get on well from that point of view. And I love it, and it's a privilege, and people pay me to do it. And I think, my goodness, I'm grateful for that. You know, and that thought alone keeps me going a lot.
I like that. And I think that, you know, the purpose part of spaces is, you know, that purpose may be provision for the family. It may be whatever it is. But I do hear a lot of people's purpose often being external to themselves. And that is the oxygen mask thing, where I often hear people's purpose being to ensure that the companies, the people that report to me, that my kids are, I go, yeah, but where are you in that? I haven't heard you. You know, it's almost like the photographs where you're never in them. You know, and so I think that's right. It's that, yes, of course, that sense of well-being for others, but it's not selfish to look after yourself, unless it's obviously counterweighted where it's all about you and nobody else. But that's not what we're talking about here. So I think that staying sane in lockdown is get your own oxygen mask on first. And I think that's a beautiful
the point is that your needs are legitimate. That's the first statement. But the second thing is that if ever you're going to be the safety net for others, for goodness sake, make sure that safety net is safe. You know, that you need to make sure that the only way you're going to be able to serve other people is if you're in decent shape too. Otherwise, you become a martyr. And, you know, the world doesn't need martyrs. It needs people who value themselves enough to take good enough care of themselves, so that then they're in great shape to look after others if that's part of their role. And one of the things I've felt really bad about in terms of what's been happening with the NHS at the moment is that, you know, the NHS has proven to, the people who work in the NHS have proven to be, for me, the ultimate heroes. You know, they have gone to work every day and they have served other people, and some have died in the service of those other people. because they have put other people's needs ahead of their own. Now, that is something that we all benefit from, but if we want it to be sustainable, we've got to make it possible for those NHS people to be sustained themselves. And we've got to make sure, therefore, that we pay them well enough and that we look after them and that we give them the kind of esteem that they deserve and so on. So spaces applies to them just as it does to everybody else. And I do think that it is unhealthy unless people can feel legitimate to put their own oxygen mask on first, to look after their own diet, exercise, sleep requirements and so on, and then their own spaces.
And I think that just as I kind of bring my thinking to a conclusion, one of the things I'm noticing is that when I started out in, and I'm going to do this thing with my fingers, leadership, inverted commas, leadership development or executive development or whatever we want to call it, I was very much going down the path of the legitimacy of the training was about the learning. And as I now kind of move on, I get to a sense of, well, you may need to learn something to have a more complex conversation, but this sense of, where is fellowship? Fellowship comes from you being somebody who I would look to. And I think that recognition now, I think lockdown has, and I hope that it has really shown that when companies have 50,000 people working from home and it's working, trust, that sense of actually, as you say, autonomy, that sense of whatever it might be, organizations recognizing that spaces model, that giving people, that putting their own oxygen, let's help people put their own oxygen masks on. So as they grow and they develop, we will have more rounded, empathetic, resilient human beings who will then happen to work for us. And actually, if every organization developed people in that context, as people moved around, the workforce would be more adult, more mature, more resilient. And then when they join us, we'll show them how to do the job.
Well, we probably need to do one of our conversations on the subject of resilience, but just to finish for my side, resilience is something that people bring with them, but they also can have it undermined or enhanced by the experiences they have in the workplace. And I believe that the only smart place for any employer to be is in the place of enhancing the resilience of their people, not undermining it.
No, I'll buy into that 100%. Well, listen, time is upon us. And so on that note, again, David, we're getting into our stride with these now. So I'm going to press the pause button or the stop button. We'll keep chatting for a few moments, but staying sane in lockdown. That was our thoughts.